if a show is going to do philosophy, I want them to go whole hog with it. Like, I really want them to explore that. And I felt like at points they introduced concepts that we're just supposed to accept, and they don't really explore the implications of it that as much as they should. In philosophy, it's easy to confine studies to one figure or another. You get like Nietzsche studies, for example, or Heidegger studies, and there are entire sub-disciplines just centered around the corpus of one particular philosopher, and the specialist engagement with the philosophical tradition at large is filtered through that figure.
You mentioned a philosophical idea, but if it, correct me if I'm wrong, this is the idea that if you have a boat and replace every piece of wood on that boat,
the ship
over
of
time,
Theseus, right?
Is it the same boat, basically? Okay.
Yeah, so they talk about this in the show, and they have the AI give a pithy answer to it, which is rather arrogant on their part, because there's a reason this is one of the most enduring thought experiments in all of philosophy.
Is it because there's no answer?
Well, there's no simple answer.
Yeah,
let's just say that. It seems intuitive that if you only replace one board, then the ship is still the ship of Theseus. But eventually you're going to have replaced the entire ship. So the question is it now a new ship? And if so, at what point did it cease to be the old ship and become the new ship? And it's a really difficult question. You have to have a way of determining what metaphysical identity is in the first place. Now, the follow-up to the question, making it all the more perplexing, is like, let's say you collect the remains, the refuse of the old ship, and reconstruct a new old ship.
Yeah.
And now you're left with this ship made of new wood and the ship made of the old wood, both of which are new. Which one is the authentic ship of Theseus? So that's the question they raise. In the show, Wanda basically constructs like a simulacrum of Vision, who has Vision's memories, I think, and then the government takes Vision's shell minus the Mind Stone, which Thanos took, and sort of builds it into a robot, an automaton that has Vision's original body but none of his memories.
Interesting.
And so there's this confrontation between these two automata, one possessing Vision's memory but not his bodies, the other his body but not his memories. And they have this sort of debate over, well, it's not really a debate as much as it's just a brief exchange, and they talk about the ship of Theseus. And say, well, which is the real ship of Theseus? And the implicit question is, which of us is a real Vision? And I think it's the one with the body but no memories, says neither is the real ship. So that's kind of an unsatisfying answer.
Yeah.
I mean, what was the answer? The question that answer raises is, well, what was the original ship in the first place? It leaves you with the question of the metaphysical identity of the ship. Now, one of the reasons that I'm so fascinated with Deleuze is because he once described himself as a pure metaphysician. So he dealt with these kind of problems, but he articulated an account of metaphysics that is kind of unprecedented and unparalleled in the philosophical world. So it deals with what he calls difference in itself, or pure difference. The sort of introductory preliminary notion is that difference in itself is not difference between two static objects. Generally, in demotic colloquial language, when we speak of difference, it's always difference between two objects comparatively.
Yeah.
That's not what Deleuze is interested in. He's interested in explaining and this is going to be difficult to communicate without going into a lot of preceding philosophy. So he's interested in elaborating the preconditions, the prerequisites for all lived experience. So he described himself as a transcendental empiricist, which, if you understand those terms, it's kind of counterintuitive. It almost seems oxymoronic, but when you begin to grasp Deleuze's metaphysical system, it's thrown into sharper relief. It's rendered more intelligible. So difference in itself is, as Deleuze sees it, is considered to be a genetic principle underlying all observable entities. So it's not the static entity in itself which allows you to compare it differentially to another entity, but it is difference, as a matter of fact, that allows the comparison to emerge in the first place. So it's difficult for the uninitiated mind to reorient itself and begin to consider difference this way, as like a transcendental precondition of experience. But you think about, there must be some reason that the universe presents itself to you as organized, and that principle is difference in itself. You're perceiving difference before you perceive the identical or singular. Identical there has a specific technical philosophical meaning, the individual objects. So Deleuze's metaphysical system becomes rather complex and convoluted very quickly. But in the context of the ship of Theseus, the point is, it's erroneous to speak of the ship as a metaphysical identity in the first place. It never was a metaphysical object. The only thing allowing you to conceive it as such was the differential equation, and that not in a mathematical sense.
Oh, darn.
The differential this principles, substructure that converged in that ship. A good way of thinking about this is with colors. You see red, white, the red, white. I was gonna say red, white, and blue.
The rainbow.
Roy G. Biv, right? The
Yeah.
rainbow. And typically we're used to thinking of the colors as discrete entities. But when you really break it down, each color is dependent on all the others to be meaningful, in a manner of speaking. Not semiotically, but in order to have its identity, it's dependent on a series of distinctions between the others. So a good way of thinking about this is you consider white to be the pre-differentiated form of all the various colors.
Yeah.
And because of the principle of difference in itself, your mind is able to classify and categorize colors. And there are various kinds of difference. Intensive difference, to Deleuze, is the more primordial of the two, and it concerns differences that are not iterable, like temperature. If you divide a glass of water, the temperature of the water doesn't change, for instance.
Yeah.
And that is kind of considered to be the form of difference that subtends reality itself. And then extensive difference is a difference that's divisible and iterable. Like height, for instance.
Yeah.
Or weight. So the upshot of what I'm trying to say here, and I may not have presented this in the most intelligible of terms for the layman viewer, is that the problem with the ship of Theseus is that it presumes metaphysical identities for both the ship and its derivative, the two ships, the daughter ships, let's call them. In reality, there is no such thing as a metaphysical identity. there's only this sort of process of differentiation and morphogenesis. These emergent structures being continuously differentiated. At any rate, that is my take, or rather Deleuze's take, if I've done a satisfactory job of conveying his philosophy on the ship of Theseus.
So if I were to put it in like more of my terms,
Sure.
like layman terms, I'll take a stab at it. It's not necessarily that the ship of Theseus is like itself has an identity.
Mm-hmm.
We assigned it that. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, it's a product of the human intellect.
Yeah, and so it's like we gave it an identity, but it doesn't really have a concrete thing to hold on to.
Yeah, there's no identity that transcends the human categorization of it as an identity.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.